Editor Francesca, for their diligence and hard work in organizing tonight's event. Thank you to our art director, Pam, who if you haven't seen the broadsides yet, you definitely should take a look at them. Maybe take one home with you, but Pam designed our gorgeous broadside for Chard's winning poem, which you should absolutely take home with you. And also a big thank you to my poetry editor, Abby Chabitnoy, for her sharp eye and wonderful editorial support. And then a big hearty welcome to our new executive editor, Britt, who is in her first year with the magazine. It's been really lovely to work with you here thus far. Now, while our reading takes place here at Amherst Books, the Massachusetts Review operates out of the University of Massachusetts Amherst, which acknowledges that it was founded and built on the unceded homelands of the Pocumtuck Nation and on the land of the Norwottuck community. We begin with gratitude for nearby waters and lands. We recognize these lands and waters are important relations with which we are all interconnected and depend on to sustain life and well-being. The Pocumtuck had connections with these lands for millennia, over 400 years of colonization. When Pocumtuck peoples were displaced, many joined their Algonquin relatives to the east, south, west, and north. That includes Mashpee and Aquinnah, Wampanoag, Nipmuc, Narragansett, Mohegan, Pequot, Mohican communities, and the Abenaki, and other nations of the Wabanaki Confederacy. These native peoples still maintain connections and relationships of care for these lands today. And we also acknowledge that the University of Massachusetts Amherst is a land-grant university, and as part of the Morrill Land Grant Act, portions of the land from the 82 native nations west of the Mississippi were sold to provide the resources to found and build the university. As an active step towards decolonization, we encourage you to learn more about the native nations whose homelands UMass Amherst now resides on, and the indigenous homelands in which you live and work. We also invite you to deepen your relationship to these living lands and waters. For just a little history about the prize before I talk a little bit about Chard. For 25 years, Anne Halley was the poetry editor of MR, had a long association with the English department, and was the author of 3 distinctive volumes of verse and many prize-winning stories, while enjoying a long career as a beloved teacher in the U.S. and abroad. The Anne Halley Poetry Prize is co-sponsored by the Massachusetts Review and the English Department of the University of Massachusetts Amherst. A prize of $500 is awarded annually for the best, which we know, and we certainly understand this is deeply subjective for us, the best poem to appear in the preceding year of MR, as chosen by the 2 editors, myself and Abby, and at times a member from the broader literary community. The prize this year, and the prize poet generally is offered and invited to give a spring reading here at Amherst. This year's recipient and the poet that we've all gathered here to hear this evening is Chard deNiord, who we're grateful to have join us tonight. Chard is the author of 7 books of poetry, most recently In My Unknowing from the University of Pittsburgh Press, and Interstate, also with the University of Pittsburgh Press. He served as the Poet Laureate of Vermont from 2015 to 2019. Very early on in any given semester, I will share with my workshop students that poets, in particular among writers, only ever write about 2 subjects, love and loss. That while there might be a myriad of subcategories that may be mused upon in one's poetry, very often those subcategories fall along the lines of the aforementioned subjects, permanence and impermanence. In fact, the very act of writing a poem, I tell them, is one's attempt to fix to the page an experience, a feeling, or a memory that, even as you're drafting, is changing in the way you remember or were affected by it. I liken it to the way deNiord's poem describes its river, flows and stays, stays and flows. My students, of course, don't buy any of this. deNiord's Halley Prize-winning poem entitled This Side of You opens with an epigraph from the 19th century English poet John Clare that reads, "Words are poor receipts for what time hath stole away." And as that epigraph might suggest, the poem's primary mode is elegiac. It is a poem of mourning and reflection. It is a poem that grapples with loss, addressing the lost figure directly at the poem's outset. Quote, "I think you're still here sometimes, calling to me," deNiord writes. Loss is not an unfamiliar feeling to anyone in this room, which is partly why deNiord's poem originally resonated with Abby and myself. It's a feeling we've all experienced. Loss isn't exactly novel. However, the poem finds us at a particular moment of immense challenge, fear, and loss being felt across the country, across the globe. We see it on our televisions, when we scroll social media or read an article, individuals losing their research opportunities, their livelihoods, their health care, or, as in the case of numerous arts organizations and publications across the country, such as the Massachusetts Review, their grant funding. And for some, increasingly, that sense of loss can extend even to hope. Art and poetry is often what we turn to during such moments of despair and hopelessness. It is why Frost has called every poem, quote, "a momentary stay against the confusion of the world," end quote. It reminds us of the importance and necessity of this work. Shortly after the election, writer and graphic novelist Mira Jacob posted a text message she sent to her son, part of which read, quote, "Art is making something no one asked for, not because they didn't need it, but because they didn't know they needed it until you made it, until it helped them breathe and dream and find a way forward. It's part of a map that shows us how we get out of this place," end quote. deNiord's poem gave a perspective I didn't know I needed. With its quiet meditative stance, its pastoral looking, speaking, and listening to the natural world as the space to take one's grief. The world speaking back in the only way it can, simple language of river, sycamore, and wind. The language of change, of sleep and renewal, which urges the speaker to move on, as we all must. It's a poem that risks sentimentality and vulnerability, which is so often what young poets are instructed they shouldn't do. Words are poor receipts for what time hath stole away. And yet, for the poet, words are what one has to map and record human experience and feeling for others to find, what it has felt like to be alive at a particular time. However poor of receipts words might be, however limited and insufficient in the face of reckoning and loss, it's what we have. So, may as well hear a few more of them. Please help me welcome Chard deNiord.
Deeply moving and memorable, and it's such a great honor to be here, and I want to just thank the whole staff here at the Massachusetts Review, Emily and Britt and Nathan, for doing the hard work you do in reading all these poems all the time. And just deciding, oh, what's good? What isn't so good, you know? And then coming up with just some really stellar work in your magazine every issue. So, Nathan said some really profound stuff about loss, and I just want to follow up on that. It's one of my, as Emily Dickinson would say, flood subjects, and I just, as Nathan was speaking, I just suddenly realized that one of the sources of my inspiration for writing a lot about grief and loss is Gilgamesh. And there's a wonderful translator of Gilgamesh. I think he's the best myself. I mean, so many people have translated Gilgamesh, but Herbert Mason is just a fabulous translator. And he translates these wonderful lines about Gilgamesh's grief. All that is left to one who grieves is convalescence, no change of heart or spiritual conversion. For the heart has changed, and the spirit has converted to see how much it costs to lose a friend it loved. Isn't that beautiful. It just like captures so eternally the spirit of loss. So I'm going to actually start with this winning poem. Well, I guess it's fresh in people's minds or memories here. This is from this new book here called Westminster West. It just came out actually last week from Tupelo Press, and so the editor there asked me what I wanted to call it with this book, and I live in Westminster West, not Vermont. I said, why not just call it Westminster West? You know. And, so I love the sound of it, Westminster. Though actually, it's right on the border of Putney, but I live technically in Westminster West. And I wrote this poem shortly after my mother died, and I was sitting under I guess it must have been a tulip tree, or a tree that was flowering amazingly in Shelburne Falls. I mean, it was near Burlington, and not Shelburne Falls, that's Massachusetts. And we were right on the lake there, Lake Champlain, and I just looked up into this tree and wrote this. So I want to thank the bees for imparting this poem to me. This side of you. Words are poor receipts for what time it stole away. John Clare, who knew a thing or two about grief himself. I think you're still here sometimes, calling to me like the thrush at dusk, inside the woods where I lose my way. I search for you like a ghost myself in all the usual places. Stand on the shore this side of you, and speak to the river that flows and stays and flows. Everything is deaf to what I say, choosing only to speak in the single tongue of its simple language. River, sycamore, wind. I listen to the hills and valleys with the hope that even a breeze will cure my heart. Move on, it whispers, in the honey locusts abuzz with bees. Move on. A few leaves fall like empty pages. I carry your stone with a perfect ear for silence. So I'm going to read some poems from this book, and maybe some from a new manuscript I'm working on. I've also written this subject, it's of grief, and it just won't leave you alone for some reason. But the great challenge is, how do you keep writing about it? So I came up with this idea of writing a conversation between Inanna and Dumuzi. Do you know who they are?
Inanna.
Inanna and Dumuzi?
Well, yeah, plow my fields, Inanna. Who will plow my fields?
Thank you.
Oh. I can't, hashtag never
Where did
forget.
that come from?
I took a world mythologies class at my wonderful women's college that I went to.
Which one was that?
Stevens, the Seven Sisters that's in the Midwest.
Wow.
Yeah.
So do you know who her beloved was?
I'm like
who
that.
said that?
Yeah, the one that she wanted to plow the fields.
That
Yeah.
was Dumuzi.
Yeah.
Dumuzi.
Yeah,
And
Dumuzi.
Inanna. And they're the oldest couple in literature in the world.
Yeah.
We're going back 4,000 BC,
Right.
right? In where?
Mesopotamia?
Do you know where they were?
Sumeria? Mesopotamia.
Yes.
Yeah.
Very good. Very good, Samaria.
I'm gonna
That's
go
right.
try out for Jeopardy.
Anyway, so that text was lost for
Yeah.
thousands of years. And then it was excavated in 1947. And some genius
Interesting.
translated it. If you ever see the text on tablets, it's how did they ever translate it, right? And so then, there were references to it, of course. So what did it become the primary inspiration for? This incredible love poem between Dumuzi and Inanna. Inanna was the goddess of fertility. Dumuzi was the god of nut trees. And they were just madly in love. And they wrote this poetry that is just breathtakingly beautiful and timeless. And who read it?
Yeah.
Solomon.
Oh.
He based the Song of Songs on it.
The best part of the Bible that they always hide in 2 Kings, by the
That's
way.
right. Anyway, so this guy excavated in 47. It was in a museum in Iraq. During the Iraq War, American soldiers stole all the tablets. And he brought them to this country. And no one knew where they'd gone until someone found out that he had sold them to Hobby Lobby. And the UN found out about it and said, you give those tablets back right away. So he did. They're back in Iraq now. So isn't that unbelievable?
Wow.
It's both unbelievable and very believable.
I know. Yes, thank you. Anyway, so back to my question. How do you keep writing about that subject, right? So I've imagined this conversation between Inanna and Dumuzi in the Bardo, and written a play about it called After Talk, which is actually being produced and put on as a play in Walpole, New Hampshire in the fall. I'll just read you 2 or 3 of those exchanges and then move on to the book. So this is Dumuzi and then Inanna, very short poems. He says to her, can you imagine what the Bardo looks like, anybody? Is it a cloud, or what does it look like? Whatever you want it to look like, I guess. I was the salmon, he says to her, who solved the rapids by catching the current that ran inside them the opposite way. I was the swallow who mastered the air by cutting its hem with its razor in my tail. I was the dreamer in bed with you, who was also several in the form of one, who kept you mythical as well as literal among the many who swam and flew. And she responds, I was a wire whose current ran from leaf to leaf with invisible fire. And I pointed until I pointed to the dirt at 0 hour. And all the world cried out in flames the sovereign right. I had to sit in the shade and lose myself to the many, turn to grass, a single blade. Then he says to her, every day the fever returned and drenched me in sweat. I dressed from head to foot in a thin, wet suit I couldn't take off. No pill or bath broke its grip. No paradox of blankets or steaming rocks. I waited for the cure of a single kiss. She says, I went to the beach to stare at loss, its one blank eye that doesn't close, to study the sea as a book of names inscribed on blue, eternal pages, to write your name on horizon's line, then read the clouds as the runes of those who write from the other side, to study the sun, the way it falls behind my back, until only the sound of waves defines the shore is there. No, there. To sit in the dark as if it were light. And he says, I swung my axe like a man possessed. I was the master of earth, clearing a path between one meadow and the next, burning the piles till nothing was left. She says, each morning, 1 or 2 careered against the glass, then dropped concussed or dead to the ground. They saw reflections of trees and skies, then flew full bore into the glass. Who, I wondered, will grieve for me as a casualty of something I didn't see? The secret opened that everyone knew already. My tongue conspired against my need to tell it. How heavy my pencil grew when I tried to lift it. There was nothing that everyone didn't already know. How eloquent I was in the silence when others spoke. A cricket here, a locust there. Just two more of these. I saw 10,000 rounds zeroing in from the cosmic squad. Already I'd heard from another world, the faint reports grow louder there. No blank in the breach of a single star. No tear in the eye of a heavenly host. Him. I was going to stack wood today. I was going to stack wood one day. Move the pile from the yard to the shed, log by log, until a cord took shape. But I needed to keep them in the yard for a while to see each log in another world, where thought takes shape in forms that don't exist on earth. I needed to see the logs in all their glory inside the shed before they were there, stacked and square beneath the roof. To use my eyes as arms inside my head before lifting a twig. So there they are in the Bardo, talking to each other like that forever. So that's what I think poets maybe dream about themselves, and then falling asleep. So I'll read a few more from this book, Westminster West. I just want to say that I'm so fortunate to have a wife who can paint.
That's amazing.
Oh.
This is her painting.
Wow.
Which you have to look on the back. Which I think is just stunning. Of course, I'm biased, but I other people have said so too. So I think there's corroboration here. And I don't know what it is exactly, but it's like sort of evocative and sort of heavenly and earthly enough at the same time that I think it works. Yeah. I don't know what she was thinking, but it doesn't matter. Does it? So, how thirsty. The earth is yours and everything in it. That's an anonymous line. Should that person get credit for saying that? I think it's so beautiful. The earth is yours and everything in it. It just has echoed throughout history. How thirsty I grew from being satisfied. The same sugar that rose from the earth rose also in me. I planted myself on a bank, masqueraded as a willow, wept with joy above the river, wept with sorrow above the river. This was a still ritual for feet, to know the earth like a root, to imagine my body as a tree. My tears were clear, both sweet and bitter. One leaf cried out to another, empty me today of all my color. Fill me tomorrow with a shot of sugar. So I'm going to read just a few longer poems. That's like a page and a half. That's not terribly long now. But this poem is again back to Uruk, back to Gilgamesh, who was do you know the story of Gilgamesh? He was so obsessed with grief over the loss of his friend Enkidu, who was killed by who? This wonderful monster in the orchard named Humbaba. A lovely sort of onomatopoetic name, and he grieved for him so terribly that he wanted to find it sent him off on a search for eternal life. If I can't have my dear friend Enkidu, then I want eternal life, damn it. And so he goes off on the search for for eternal life, and he has this great, I think it's the greatest epic ever written. Just my own personal bias. Anyway, so he was king of Uruk, Gilgamesh was, and Enkidu was his friend. And so, he has all these incredibly metaphorical adventures along the way. And I've sort of summarized the whole story here to try to come to terms with myself, my own journey, but it's Gilgamesh's journey, but it's everybody's journey who's grieved somebody. The king of Uruk had never wrestled Enkidu. They fell in love, these two guys, wrestling with each other. The wild man of the steppe, and just barely defeated him on points. He never would have fallen in love with him with a love that was greater than that for a woman, nor asked him to go hunting with him in the sacred forest for the monster guardian Umbaba. The beginning of history is an ageless story would never have happened. He starts the wheel of history rolling right here. If the king had never suffered the loss of himself in another, he never would have known himself as someone less than himself without his beloved, nor hurt with the grief that rendered him listless, although he called his suffering nothing, with a smile to the face of the Queen of Heaven, who craved his devotion, but couldn't have it. His only solace for being human. If he hadn't grieved so deeply, he never would have grown into the comedian he did, nor swum to the bottom of the sacred river to pick the flower that the shaman said would bless him forever, nor almost drowned while diving for that blossom with a godlike breath, nor tasted the salt in the river that cursed him with a thirst for wine and hatred of mirrors, nor mastered the art of curling his tongue around the diphthong in death, nor learned how to say the single sound of E, A, and U at the center of beauty, nor loosened his grip on the thorny flower as he slept on the beach, oblivious to the snake traversing his body, then hissing to the darkness, "Hey, only I'm eternal," nor dreamed of grilling a gazelle stewed in garlic, then eating it with his wife and children in a joyous reunion at the marble table in his hyacinth garden. If he had never slept so deeply, he would have felt the serpent absconding with his flower into the forest where she devoured it whole, then shed her skin. He never would have made his way back home with his grief for his friend, nor gained the knowledge of how to read the text of clouds as one long sentence that spelled his end, nor discovered the secret of how to string the smallest things together as he spent the rest of his life ruling his kingdom, building a wall around his city, telling stories to his brilliant children, planting his garden throughout the morning, happy with his title, comedian king, lying in his hammock, dreaming and waking, waking and dreaming. All right, now for something completely different. How to teach poetry to freshmen. I had to do that for years until I realized maybe this is impossible. So I said, all right, damn it, I'm going to write a little instruction manual in the form of a prose poem, and maybe this will work for two or three of them. Say poetry happens when you fall for each other, like randy teenagers on a hot summer night in one of their father's pickup trucks, in which before you can say F-150 or Tacoma or Silverado, they start flirting and then kissing and feeling each other up under a full moon beside a placid lake down a dirt road somewhere, and then rhyming and sejouring and alluding and anaphering and alliterating and assonating and diphthonging and consonnating and parataxing and leaping and syncopating and then jamming and then ending in a couplet of sound and sense that sings in the dark without any immediate or overbearing need for meaning. It's nonetheless there, which is how you can tell it's poetry in the final breaths of its little deaths when it's over. Okay. So this whole idea of the other has intrigued me for years, but the idea of the other is different but the same. So I thought I'd try to figure out a kind of poetic dialectic that would make sense about how to talk about that difference and similarity at the same time, which is sort of right at the heart of Eros, and yet so separate, in which, as the great poet Philip Larkin once said, creates a unique distance from isolation. Isn't that beautiful? It's from his poem Talking in Bed. You must believe without any evidence or reason to believe that your beloved is standing behind you waiting for you to turn around by rotating only a little at first and then some more until you see her face and smell his hair that emanates a scent that's a lot like yours, only better. Then feel the tickle of her breath on your lips and cheeks and hear his voice that speaks your name with an accent you've never heard before but are drawn to for its inflections and music, although you're still afraid to turn completely around and regard her there as your beloved, who appears so stunning you find it hard to believe he's actually there and wonder if maybe she's a ghost or vision, although he seems so real and alive with lilac breath and riveted stare. You can feel the charge of her skin through his dress that causes you in turn to believe against every reason and fear in the mystery that compels you to keep turning around until you behold her form and visage so completely it continues to beguile you. Each time you blink and become so dizzy, you can't stop staring at him as the cynosure who stands at the center of your turning, which causes you next to grow oblivious to everything else because you've met her now in the flesh and can think of nothing else besides him in this danger zone of turning around, which causes you in yet another turn a close call with oncoming traffic and loss of appetite and forgetfulness, which you only survive at the mercy of a God who's employed by another God whose name you're forbidden to speak, although the animals repeat it in the wild, until in the midst of your obsession with her, you find yourself in private with him, in a room somewhere beside a river, with the exigent need to make an exchange from you to her, in the paradox of the transitory realm of eternal being, in which you walk away together into the world that's being transformed by only your turning around to behold your other, so you could walk away transfigured into a field like God's, remembering That moment you first beheld each other in your raiment of everyday clothes and embraced as one, although you were two and so vastly different, you could never have known from seeing his face that she was the one, if you're ever to love.
Mm.
Okay, I'll get a shorter one here if I can find one. See, one of the great challenges when you get old, when you become a little older, is writing short poems. I really don't have as much to say as I think I do, you know. Just write like Emily. Or Basho, even better maybe. The lack. So I am feckless, I admit, for I was born without sufficient feck. Which is why I take a supplement of it, along with all my other pills and stuff, although it's never quite enough. So I digress as a way to curse the dearth of feck, as if a prolegomenon or plot could plug the drain of my so leaky self, and then and afterward as well. But no, not yet. I had a dream last night in which I was enough. Okay. Let's see here. So my father was a surgeon, and he wanted me to be a surgeon or a doctor. So he used to take me to the hospital to do rounds, meet with sick folks. And then he said, well, let's take you to see an operation. I said, no. But he did anyway. So I went with him, and I saw an operation, and which was pretty scary. And then he wanted me to watch or participate actually in a bronchoscopy. You know what that is? It's when you look down into someone's lung through a bronchoscope. And so we did that. I did that, and this is about that. So my father wanted me to see what he did for a living with the hope that I'd grow up to do the same, which was to operate on people while they lay asleep in the dreamless twilight of anesthesia. And then one day when I was 12, he asked me to peer into the lung of an elderly man through a bronchial scope, an engineer from the Chesapeake and Ohio Railroad, who'd smoked packs of Camels a day for 40 years. We were in an examining room of the hospital in Clifton Forge, Virginia, and I was playing hooky in order to attend my father's medical school. He asked me to step on a stool he'd placed beside a patient seated below on a similar stool as he held the scope like a sword in both his hands while looking down the metal tube and then away. So I did, without knowing what to say except, okay. Now, look down there like I just did, he said, which I did, with one eye closed while spying with the other the vast reticulate labyrinth of a speckled lung and its sepia lining of pleura. The scope was lit by a tiny bulb that pierced the darkness of his insides, what I would later come to call the Newman Saccus, when I'd grown and come to see the seat of breath as the spirit's home. And the more I looked, the more the darkness seemed to rise, despite the light at the end of the tube, since I was sure that I was seeing the end of this man's life. In the specter of a shade that spread to my eye like a presence I had never seen before, but recognized somehow by its telltale umber, and also the look my father betrayed. It was then, in only a moment of my gazing away, that I saw the beam of the instrument's bulb, the brilliant lamp of a locomotive barreling down on me along the James River, with more than 100 cars full of coal, with this psychopomp at his window and controls, waving at me in the din of his engine, and cars on their hundreds of wheels, shaking the trees and sleepers, shining the tracks in squeals, and the whistle too, that pierced my ears as it rose to the clouds where it disappeared into the sky's cerulean blue, which was when, without any warning of my father's signal, that the old man coughed, a ghastly cough, trembling as he did from his shoulders down, propelling a wad of phlegm into my eye.
Oh, God.
My father chuckled like a god, then gagged. "Welcome to medicine, son," as I fell back into his arms of the nurse behind me and who said, "You got an eyeful there, young man."
Oh, God.
Then wiped it off. The holy sputum my father reported the following week. When the word came back from the lab, it tested positive for cancer cells. But it remained, that phlegm, as a film in my eye that thickened with age to a strong, clear lens for seeing straight through the scope of time to the various desultory, inevitable ends of everyone I meet. I didn't become a doctor. I tried. I majored in pre-med. So I'll just read a few more, just one or two more short ones, pretty short ones from this new manuscript called Terminal X. And I'm not sure why I even called this Terminal X, so maybe I'll change it to something else, like Who Was Left a Wild Ass Go Free or something like that. Anyway, let's see. I think I will read one that's difficult out of this, and then maybe just one or two more at the most. Grief is the river with a foreign name for the children who've died in Gaza. Grief is the river with a foreign name that floods your heart, pulling you in with a musical force you can't resist for the song it plays inside the silence of the things she left, that mean everything to you but nothing to anyone else. The dress, the doll, the drawing, transformers each on the surface that runs through the country of your heart, shock and numb, which is why you imagine earth is heaven when you see her face in the surface of the river, memories mirror, and think it's real, although you know it's floating to the sea, where it will join the others, although you swear at the God of time who leads you by the hand into the water and squeezes your chest and holds your head beneath the water until you join her, although you're sitting on your porch in front of the mountains, and the birds are singing and the clouds are floating like letters that form no word on the pages of the sky that just keeps turning. Okay, let's see. Just two more here in this manuscript. You know, it's always sort of terrifying to read from new work, but then if you don't necessarily hear it. Here's one that might be pertinent to this place a little bit. Walt Whitman and Emily Dickinson have checked into the same Imperial Hotel, where they lie in bliss in the same commodious bed, writing together, both short and long, long and short, forever. That's it. So, Emily and that interestingly led me to write a poem called Nothing. The womb of paradox, the denouement of irrationality, the crucible of creation, the void at the end of the mind, the empty tomb, the ironic source of everything, the necessary mystery, God's workshop, the ultimate enigma, fatal aphrodisiac, King Lear's perfect answer, what becomes of itself, infinity's beloved, darkness's mirror. I think that's it. That's enough. Thank you.